Welcome to Vintage Heart. The summer of 1863 reeked of old blood and burnt earth, a persistent stench that clung to the fabric of uniforms and embedded itself in the soul. Ella moved with the mechanical precision that only years of service could bestow, a diligent shadow in the battlefield of charity. Her blue uniform, faded by countless washings and ironings, was a shield as much as an identity. Ella was a woman of the Union, a defender of the North, and, above all, an abolitionist. The field hospital had been hastily improvised in an old barn on the outskirts of Gettysburg, a hot and clamorous inferno, where the constant sound of groans and the screech of saws defined the soundtrack of her existence. Ella felt a bone-deep weariness, but she did not allow herself the luxury of stopping. To stop meant surrendering to the horror. Her strength resided not in musculature, but in an iron conviction. Every life saved was a small victory against barbarity. Yet, not all lives were equal. Since the beginning of the war, Ella had sworn an internal precept. She would attend to every Union soldier with the devotion of a mother and the expertise of an angel. As for the rebels, the men in gray who fought to maintain the injustice of slavery, the thought of touching them provoked a physical revulsion. She had managed to circumvent the dilemma, working in sectors where prisoners rarely arrived, or simply allowing other doctors to take charge, maintaining a prudent distance dictated by her political morality. That afternoon, the July sun sank like a molten coin on the horizon, staining the interior of the barn with an ominous orange hue. The last wagon of severely wounded men arrived, stumbling. The blankets were soaked. Dr. Davies, his face covered in soot and exhaustion, shouted the order to Ella over the ambient noise. "Nurse Clark, 3 more in the back. One is very bad, bullet in the shoulder and shattered coccyx. He needs immediate attention. He's bleeding out." Ella nodded, collecting her roll of bandages and a bottle of laudanum. She headed to the assigned corner. The first 2 were young men from Vermont, familiar blue uniforms. The third, however, was different. He was lying face up on an improvised cot, his body covered in dust and mud. Ella approached, ready to remove the blanket and assess the wound, but stopped dead. Beneath the grime, the cloth of his jacket was not blue. It was gray. A pale gray, faded, ripped, and dirty with dark red. He wore the remains of golden insignia on his collar. He was not a simple private. He was a Confederate officer. The blood ran cold in her veins. The air in the barn, already staled, seemed to become unbreathable. Ella stood immobile, observing the face of the enemy. It was a strong face with chiseled features, though now pale, covered in cold sweat, and with a several-day beard that accentuated the hardness of his jaw. He was unconscious, perhaps on the brink of death. "Nurse Clark, any issue?" Davis urged her, his voice tense with the passing time. Ella did not take her eyes off the man in gray. The promise, the conviction that had kept her sane, crashed violently against reality. This man had fought to keep others in chains. This man had wielded a weapon against those whom Ella considered heroes. He is a rebel, doctor," she murmured, the word rebel coming out as if it burned her tongue. Davies looked at her with exasperation. "I know, Ella, and he is dying. We cannot afford political judgment right now. Duty, Miss Clark, duty, your oath." The oath. The Hippocratic oath which she had recited with fervor before leaving her comfortable life in Boston. The oath that obliged her to heal without distinction of person, rank, or creed. Ella clenched her jaw. The hatred she felt was visceral, but discipline was stronger. If she let him die, would she be any better than them? Would she allow her principles to turn her into an executioner? She took a deep breath, letting the air out slowly, and forced herself to approach. I need someone to hold him steady. I am going to try to stabilize the bullet in the shoulder." Removing the heavy blanket, she revealed the magnitude of his wounds. His right shoulder was a bloody mess. Furthermore, the coccyx wound, likely caused by a shell blast or a brutal fall, was the most dangerous. His pelvis might be shattered. As her expert hands assessed the temperature of his skin, cold, a sign of shock, she was forced to strip away the filth of battle. She needed to clean the area. She carefully cut away the uniform cloth, revealing the man's firm musculature. Ella saw the engraved leather cartridge belt that still crossed his chest. With a sudden movement, she removed it, feeling a pang of resentment upon touching his possessions. As she wiped the grime from his neck and chest, Ella noticed a small silver chain. On his left hand, he wore a simple ring. Intimate details that the war had not erased. "Connor," she read on the inside of the ring, just before beginning the aggressive cleaning. Ella focused solely on the wound. The bullet had impacted forcefully in the shoulder. Extraction under these conditions was nearly impossible without deep anesthesia, and laudanum was scarce. She tilted her head, bringing a small oil lamp closer to better see the contour of the wound. In that instant, her face was very near his. She could smell the faint aroma of smoke and forest that still lingered beneath the blood. Despite his unconsciousness, Connor was an imposing man. His dark brown hair, plastered to his forehead by sweat, was abundant. And although his face was relaxed by pain and unconsciousness, there was a line of bitterness etched around his lips. It was the face of someone who did not sleep peacefully. Ella shuddered, not from fear, but from the unexpected intimacy they shared in that crucial moment. She was exposing an enemy, accessing the sanctity of his flesh. "I know you are an enemy, Connor," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her. "And I know you represent everything wrong with this country. But my hands are not instruments of vengeance. They are instruments of healing." Ella spent the next 2 hours completely focused on him. She cleaned the shoulder, extracting fragments of cloth and grime. The coccyx wound was more complicated, requiring a compressive bandage and absolute rest. Ella worked with a fierce intensity, defying the death that prowled the barn. When she finished, the straw bed was fresh, the bandages clean, and his body, though bruised, looked less close to the abyss. Ella straightened up, feeling the ache in her own back, and sighed. She had saved a Confederate officer. The taste of victory was bitter and complex. The following days passed in a haze of incessant work. Ella had delegated the care of many, but had reserved Connor's for herself. It was a secret she guarded jealously, a self-imposed penance. She felt that if she did not tend to him personally, her conscience would accuse her of hypocrisy. His improvement was slow but steady. Ella fed him spoonfuls of watery broth, changed his bandages, and made him drink water. She never addressed him by his name, only as the officer. On the morning of the 4th day, as Ella moistened his dry lips with a cloth, he awoke. It was not a dramatic awakening, but a slow ascent from the depths of pain. His eyes, a deep, fathomless green, opened slowly. There was no immediate recognition, only confusion. He moved slightly, and a low groan escaped his lips before the pain immobilized him again. Ella stared at him, her heart beating with an unexpected force. It was the first time he had looked at her. "Stay still," Ella ordered, her voice firm, professional, cold. "Do not move, or the shoulder wound will reopen." It took Connor a moment to process the sound of her voice. His green eyes scanned the barn ceiling, then the blue uniform surrounding him, and finally returned to Ella. His gaze was penetrating, inquisitive. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough, rasping. "In a Union hospital," Ella replied without softening her tone. She placed the cup of water on the small table beside him, maintaining distance. Connor closed his eyes, and a muscle tensed in his jaw. He looked like a man who had just awakened to a nightmare he already knew. "A northern hospital," he repeated, with a trace of bitter irony. "Then you must be Nurse Clark," she finished, not offering her given name.
There was a tense silence, interrupted only by the laments of other men and the bustle of the medics. Connor watched her, studying the stiffness of her posture, the coolness of her blue eyes. "You are from the North, Miss Clark," he said, "and I am in your infirmary. That is an act of charity?" Ella shrugged with barely perceptible disdain. "It is an act of duty, Captain."
If you are here, alive, it is because the oath I made to my profession is stronger than my opinion of your cause. The mention of his cause, the fight for slavery, was a well-aimed dagger. Connor's face constricted. Ella did not know why he had chosen to fight on the rebel side. Perhaps he was a landowner, or perhaps he simply followed his state. But no matter the reason, the guilt was collective. "I see," Connor murmured, turning his face away. He seemed ashamed. "Now, I am going to clean that coccyx wound. I need you to turn over, slowly," Ella instructed, returning to her role as a physician. "Captain Connor O'Malley," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Ella paused. "What did you say?" "My name. It is Connor O'Malley." She nodded, gathering the ointments. "I know." "You know who I am? And yet?" "I already told you, Captain. Duty. It is not personal." She lied. Of course it was personal. Every time she touched him, she felt the contradiction throbbing beneath her fingers. The truth was that, over the past 72 hours, she had become familiar with every line of his wounded body, with every shallow breath that indicated life. Ella approached the cot. Connor looked at her with an intensity that made her doubt her cold facade. "I know you do not trust me, or my people," Connor said, his eyes fixed on her. "But if you are about to inflict pain upon me, please believe me when I say I already carry enough of the war in my mind to add more to my body." She looked at him, noticing the depth of sadness in his eyes. It was not arrogance she saw, but a type of moral exhaustion that she recognized. It was the fatigue of guilt, not the fatigue of battle. That, Ella thought with a jolt, was dangerous. It made him too human. "I will do this as quickly as possible, Captain," she promised, her voice soft for the first time. Ella proceeded to clean the delicate area with utmost care. Touching him, even for clinical purposes, was an intimate experience. His skin was warm beneath the brush of her fingers. Her movements were precise, but the fear of causing him pain made her slower. Connor bit his lip, but did not cry out. He only exhaled a hiss when the alcohol touched the wound. Ella lifted her gaze for an instant. Their eyes met. At that distance, in that forced silence, the line separating the enemy flirred dangerously. Ella felt a heat rise to her cheeks that was not caused by the suffocating air. She briefly wondered what lay behind that look. Remorse? Fear? Or just the cunning of a soldier trying to survive? Ella decided to cling to the latter idea. Keeping him as the enemy was her only defense against the strange attraction growing in the gloom of the barn. "I am finished," Ella said, closing the antiseptic jar with a dry snap. "Do not move until I return." She turned around, collecting her tools, feeling the urgent need to escape his presence. "Nurse Clark," Connor called her, with a gravity in his tone that made her stop. "Thank you." She did not turn around. She did not want to see the sincerity in his eyes. She did not want to yield to the humanity of a man who, by definition, fought for inhumanity. "Keep your thanks, Captain O'Malley," Ella said, striding quickly out of the barn without looking back. "Just heal. I have a war to win, and you are an obstacle I must overcome before returning to the battle." The truth was, looking at him, Ella no longer just saw an obstacle. She saw a man, an enemy whom her own heart, against all logic and conviction, had decided to save. And in that infirmary, in the midst of the horror of war, the most dangerous spark had been born. That of impossible love between two souls divided by the bloodiest line in American history. The oath to heal a man in gray had forced her into a war that would be fought only in silence. The war of Ella and Connor
had just begun. By the 10th day, the tension in the barn was no longer a mist. It was a rope binding them both. Connor could walk without aid. His face, previously pale from fever and blood loss, had regained the earthy color of the Virginia sun. He wore the same gray clothes Ella had washed and mended, but he put them on with the determination of a man preparing for the march. Ella watched him from the corner, where she was sorting bandages she no longer needed. She could not pretend the moment had not arrived. He would leave. Her duty was to let him go. Her conviction was to wish for his defeat.
Her heart, however, had become a traitor. Connor approached slowly, barely limping, and stopped in front of her, at a distance dictated by professionalism, but which desire had already shortened countless times. "Nurse Clark," he said. His voice was grave, stripped of any lightness. It was the voice of a man bidding farewell, not of a wound. Ella raised her gaze, forcing herself to maintain the coldness that had been her armor. "Captain O'Malley, I am glad to see your recovery. It will be good news for your army." The barely disguised cynicism in her tone did not faze him. He knew she saw him as a wasted resource of the Union, a restored enemy. "I did not come to speak of my army," he said, taking one step closer. The air vibrated between them. "I came to speak of what happened here." Ella dropped the bandages onto the table. "Nothing happened here, Captain. I did my job. I saved a life. The Hippocratic Oath does not distinguish colors or causes." "But you do, Ella," Connor said, using her first name for the first time since his fever. The sound hit her like a soft punch, dissolving the formalism that protected them. "You hated me. You still hate me, because I wear this color. And yet, you saved me. Why?" Ella felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to deny the truth, but the truth was written in the sleepless nights they had shared, in the words whispered on the brink of delirium, in the dense silence that had settled between them. I saw your humanity, Connor," Ella confessed, her voice barely a broken whisper. "I saw something that did not fit the uniform. I saw the guilt in your eyes." Connor closed his eyes and nodded, his face constricted by a deep anguish that Ella was only beginning to understand. "The guilt, yes, I carry it with me like a second skin. You are not wrong to hate me, Ella. You fight for freedom. I fight, out of inertia, for the most atrocious error of this nation. I do not own plantations. My family does not own slaves. But I am an officer in the cause that defends them. And that stain will never be erased from my soul." He leaned slightly toward her, his hazel eyes, imploring something Ella could not name. "Every night, feeling the pain in my leg, I did not think of the battlefield, but of the looks of the men and women who are denied everything. I thought of your indignation, your justice, and I wondered how I could have been so blind." Ella's convictions, once rigid, softened like wax. The barriers of the war cracked. He was not a defender of slavery. He was a trapped man, as much a victim as any other, albeit by different chains. "Then do not return," Ella said, and the phrase shot out before her mind could process the magnitude of the betrayal she was asking. Connor straightened, surprise and danger shining in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "Do not return," Ella repeated, stepping closer and seizing the lapels of his gray jacket, the contact electric and forbidden. "You said it. This is not your cause. You hate what you are defending. Go, desert." Connor took her by the wrists, separating their hands with forced gentleness. "Ella, you know what you are speaking of. It is the death penalty, not just for me. If the Union finds me—" "They won't," she interrupted, her voice trembling with desperation. "This farm is hidden. It belongs to an abolitionist family. They have been helping runaways for years. You can disappear in the North. There are safe paths, clandestine routes." He stared at her, and for a moment, Ella felt the weight of his military oaths. She felt the weight of the thousands of men who still depended on him. "I am sworn," he whispered. "Even if I do not believe in the cause, I have comrades, men who trust me.
Leaving them now is dishonor. Dishonor? Ella laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Connor, what honor is there in prolonging this slaughter? What honor is there in fighting for the misery of millions? True honor is refusing to participate in injustice. If you return, if you fall in line with your gray battalions, you will not be saving your friends. You will be condemning them and condemning your own soul. Ella placed both hands on his chest, feeling the strong, erratic heartbeat beneath the wool fabric. If you stay, if you choose desertion, you will not only be saving your life, you will be saving the part of you that deserves to live, the part I saw, the part your heart confessed to me.
Tears welled in Ella's eyes, a flood of months of repression and conviction. She did not weep for herself, but for the possibility that he might choose moral death over the real life she was offering him. I am not asking you to join the Union. I am asking you to choose peace, choose the future. Ella could not finish the sentence. She was breathless. The future was him. The future was the impossible love burning in the shadows of the barn. Connor slid his hands up to Ella's cheeks, drying a tear with the pad of his thumb, his touch now free of caution, filled with shared desperation. If I stay, if I choose to flee everything I have known, would you come with me? Connor asked, his voice barely audible. Ella nodded immediately, without hesitation. All her convictions, all her oaths bowed before the power of that moment. Anywhere, Connor, away from the war, away from the lines, where we are not Ella, the Union nurse, and Connor, the Confederate captain, just Ella and Connor. A sigh of relief and terror escaped his lips. Then so be it, Connor said. He released the fabric of her jacket and took her by the waist, pulling her to his body with sudden, definitive strength. This was not a kiss of farewell or regret. It was the sealing of a pact, the taste of betrayal and hope. The aroma of hay and gunpowder mingled with the silent oath of an uncertain future. As they separated, Ella rested her forehead on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, no longer as the heart of an enemy, but as the heart of her accomplice. "We will have to leave tonight," Ella said, whispering the plan that had formed in her mind for days. Connor held her face in his hands and, for the first time, truly smiled, though the smile was tinged with melancholy. "The war stripped us of everything, Ella, except for one thing. It left us the opportunity to create something new amidst the ashes, an impossible love born in an infirmary. And for that love, I am willing to become the most wanted man in America. I am willing to desert for you." Ella closed her eyes, feeling the triumph of a single heart over an entire army. Captain O'Malley, the enemy she was meant to vanquish, had surrendered, not to the Union forces, but to the inescapable force of love. The war of Ella and Connor had ended. The struggle for their life together was just beginning. Outside, the Virginia night closed in, and with it, the distant sound of cannons recalled the price they were both about to pay for their impossible yet unbreakable love. 3 years have passed since that icy night in Virginia. 3 years since Captain Connor O'Malley shed his blood-stained epaulets and donned the cloak of a fugitive. 3 years since Nurse Ella Prescott chose exile alongside her enemy rather than security in her own cause. The echo of the cannons had silenced, not by distance, but by the peace they had finally built with their own hands. Now they were thousands of miles from the smell of chloroform and gunpowder, in the implacable and beautiful vastness of the Rocky Mountains, where the air was so clean it seemed to wash away the guilt of the past. Their home was a small log cabin in Colorado, where only the light of the fireplace broke the darkness of the nights. Ella, no longer the austere figure of the field infirmary, wore simple wool and leather clothing. Her hair, once strictly pinned up, fell in a braid over her shoulder. She stood by the window, watching the blanket of fresh snow covering the peaks. Below, near the woodshed, was Connor. He had grown a thick beard, and his body, though still strong, no longer moved with military rigidity.
His hands, which once wielded a saber with deadly precision, now handled the axe to split wood, building instead of destroying. They had changed their name. They were now the Millers. Betrayal had a price, and that price was the loss of their identities. Ella sighed, remembering the first months of their flight. Nights hidden in dark basements, the constant terror of being recognized, the clandestine passages through Kentucky, and the long, exhausting train journey west. Every sudden sound, every prolonged gaze from a stranger, reminded them that their love had been born of transgression, and that the shadow of punishment was always near. But Connor, stripped of his uniform and the obligation to kill, had become the man she always knew he could be.
He had found redemption in hard work and Ella's unwavering patience. Ella watched him lift his gaze. Though the distance was great, their eyes met. There was no longer any trace of the desperation or resentment that had once consumed him, only peace and infinite gratitude. He set down the axe and began to climb the hill toward the cabin. The sound of his boots on the snow was the only rhythm marking their days. Entering, Connor left the mountain frost on the doormat, his eyes fixed on Ella with an intensity that had never diminished. "Are you all right, my love?" Connor asked, using the pet name that had become the only luxury they allowed themselves. Ella nodded, approaching him and feeling the cold of the outdoors on his leather jacket. She stroked the scar that still marked his side, a memory of the Union shell that had forced her to tend to him in that canvas tent. "I was just thinking about the path we traveled. It seems like a cruel, distant dream." Connor took her hands and kissed them, feeling the hardness of the earth that now marked them. "It was real, Ella, as real as the pain and as real as the choice we made that night. If we hadn't gone through the hell of the war, we would never have discovered that love is the only cause worth exerting for." They spoke little of the war or their former lives. Connor's Confederacy had collapsed. Ella's Union had triumphed. But for them, the only victory that mattered was the one they had won together in that improvised infirmary. Sometimes melancholy struck. Connor remembered his mother's face in South Carolina, not knowing if he was still alive or if she considered him a traitor. Ella remembered the disappointment of her family in Boston, who never understood how she could abandon her mission and her surname for a rebel soldier. But they had learned to console each other in that shared exile. They had lost their original families to create a new one. "Do you think one day we will be free to simply be Ella and Connor again?" she asked, doubts surfacing for an instant. Connor smiled, a full, unreserved smile. "We already are, my dear. The world may know us as the Millers, but here, in this cabin, where no one else hears us, we are the two hearts that chose life over hatred. That is the greatest freedom." The ultimate proof of that freedom and their future arrived the following spring. One afternoon, as the snow melted and the first green shoots speckled the landscape, Ella leaned over the wooden cradle Connor had patiently carved during the winter. Sleeping inside was a baby, a girl, with blue eyes and dark tufts of hair, baptized with the simple name of Hope. Ella turned to look at Connor, who stood in the doorway, moved to tears. She had never thought of herself as a mother. Her life was dedicated to the cause and to healing the wounded. Connor, a man of fractured honor, never imagined having a legacy beyond the battlefield. But there she was, Hope, a miracle born of the mud and ashes of war. She was neither of the North nor of the South. She was simply theirs. Connor approached the cradle and extended a finger, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand. The warrior, the deserter, the most wanted man in America, was now only a father. Ella watched the scene, and certainty flooded her. Their love was not just the story of a rescue in an infirmary. It was the epic of redemption. They had risked everything for a whispered oath in the midst of gunpowder, and life had returned it 100-fold. "When people think of the Civil War," Ella said, her voice soft as a caress, "they will think of Gettysburg or Richmond. They will think of presidents and generals." Connor wrapped his arm around her, drawing her to his chest,
and the old scent of hay and gunpowder had been replaced by the smell of pine and burnt wood. "But we," he murmured, kissing her forehead, "we will always remember a canvas tent in Virginia, a wounded man, and a brave nurse who dared to heal not just my body, but my soul. Our war ended the moment we chose life. And the battlefield of our love, my dear Ella, is the only one that gave us victory." They looked together at their daughter, the future they refused to lose. Outside, the setting sun painted the mountains in warm gold. They were no longer Ella Prescott or Captain Connor O'Malley. They were a family forged in impossibility, a silent testament that love, even the most improbable, is the only truth that can heal the wounds of a nation.
Their impossible love, born between bandages and the threat of death, had finally found its eternal refuge. The fight was over. They had won. Thank you for watching Vintage Heart. Please subscribe for more stories from the past.